All right, everybody, welcome to the Bacon, Bibles, and Barbells Podcast. I'm Coach Justin. I'm joined by Coach Amanda and Coach Emily. Today, we're talking about the 10 most important blood markers for your health. And we're going to get into that very shortly. But first, let's talk about what we're all doing in our training and diet, stuff like that. I'll go first. It's the most boring. I'm eating maintenance. Yay. Which is great. Feels way better than not eating maintenance in either direction, by the way, for me. And strengths. I'm back to, I just started a strength block actually today, literally today. So I'm actually getting to do some heavy-ish things again. I'm kind of easing into it, little deconditioned from not having trained that much the last couple of weeks due to a lot of business things that were going on. And goals to push some numbers this week, or this summer, I should say, and kind of see where things go without peaking in particular for an event. Don't have any competitions. Just sort of like maybe set a couple gym PRs for, the 3 to 5 rep range and go from there. What about you, Amanda?
So I spoke a little bit last week about having a hard time getting cardio in, like really just struggling to find the time for that. I think I did pretty well this week so far. So just it's exhausting because the best place for my schedule to fit it in is right after a workout. So as cardio increases later on, I'm going to have to split that and figure out a second place to put that. But right now I'm just doing 35 minutes, so it's really not a big deal to put it right after the workout. I'll probably have a snack between. I think that's one thing I'm going to start adding is get a little snack and then have some fuel and then jump on the bike.
Nice.
So finally fitting that in, which is good. It felt really good to have all of my boxes checked, the workout and the food and the cardio finally. So so that's going well.
Moving is over.
Yeah. Moving is over. Home is under contract, so we should be closing in a couple of weeks, hopefully. Nice. I'm really ready for I haven't gotten my cortisol tested, but I know it's high because the stress of all of this, waiting for at home to sell. So I'm sure I'm going to feel light years better, just overall stress once the closing is completely through. Looking forward to that.
It's such a good feeling.
Oh, yeah. And at that time, I will pick a show date. So
yeah.
Then we'll start, gearing up for that and getting ready.
Yeah, that would be
Emily,
exciting.
how's your training?
Oh, it's going. I was just thinking about this earlier today. I'm like, this week we're back to normal, but we've had, I think the last 4 weeks we've had travel company, and they're all like week-long things. So it's just been like, I think this is the first week we don't have either travel or company, and we're just back in the gym, back to doing the normal things. So yeah. But I think during those weeks I got like 2 workouts in a week, which was still fine. But finding the time slots to do cardio, like you were talking about, I just hate finding the time to do it. And so it was just like, because every day was a little bit different. Either when we were traveling, that just didn't really happen. And then when we had company, it was just like every day was a little bit different. Okay, like what time slot can I find to like stick this in? And then, so some days it happened a lot of days, but it just felt bad. It felt very unproductive sometimes. But I'm just still doing the same 3-day split basically. That I've been doing as far as training and keeping up the cardio. I have about 3.5 more weeks on my diet, and then I'm finally done. So that'll be great.
It's gone well though. So. You've your waist has gone down how much?
I don't even know. I just stopped.
What was the last measurement though? It was
27.5 inches.
Well, how much then? Well, what's the change though? Nobody knows what you.
Oh, I mean, yeah. So I quick math. I started at like 29.5 inches. So it's gone about, my waist has gone down about 2 inches. My hips have gone down about 3.5. So those are the main places. And I measure like 8 different spots, but, in the last little bit, I'm just kind of like, let's just go.
Right.
I'm still going to measure, to keep track, but it's just kind of.
Yeah. I mean, 2 or 3 inches in circumference is, that's significant.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying it hasn't gone well. I'm just saying my brain's tired of caring.
Yeah.
Because I think this spring when I dieted, I only lost like an inch off my waistline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's
Cool.
great.
I think it's hard from when one of you goes into maintenance and the other one's still dieting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it probably is. Yeah, for sure. All right, cool. Well, okay, so today I want to preface a couple things here with blood work, and these are nuances that your doctor doesn't really have time to go into for you when your doctor reviews your blood work in the office and he, tells you you're too fat or whatever else, and that you should, get outside more and eat more whatever and eat less of that, which is, by the way, they're probably generally giving you decent advice. But there's a greater context that I want to make sure that we establish. One is that, and frankly, it's because doctors often in the system they're working in don't have the time to dedicate to looking at certain types of nuances. And they're also just not told about certain things that you can only really discover by learning on your own, by reading and self-study. And one of those things is just going to be that the normal lab ranges that we use on blood work, they are nuanced, and they come from the aggregate of all the people being tested. And so for the things that everyone gets tested for, like blood counts and metabolic panels, those ranges are actually pretty good. But once you stray outside of the things that everybody gets tested, the ranges become more arbitrary because, for example, testosterone lab values, they're going down. Why? Well, probably because the only people that are getting tested for getting their testosterone tested are men and women who suspect they have low testosterone. People that don't suspect they have low testosterone aren't getting tested in general. But someone that suspects their testosterone is great is probably not bothering to have it checked, at least not as often. And so these values sort of move and shift over the years, frankly, as Americans become less healthy on average. And the other thing is that each lab sometimes will have its own ranges. So if you go get tested at like your doctor's office and he works with a local hospital lab, then that lab will provide different averages or ranges, I should say, than if you were to go to like Quest Diagnostics or something like that, who's using an aggregate, basically a national aggregated number. So realize that something being out of range doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It just means it's out of range and needs to be interpreted in a greater context of where those lab values come from and also what other markers have interplay. And we'll try to talk about some of those. We can't deep dive into every little thing, but sometimes one thing being high out of range isn't necessarily bad if there's a greater context where another value is, otherwise it could be low, could be high, could be in the middle. It widely depends on what it is. So we want to kind of bring up those as much as we possibly can and realize that having markers out of range is no reason to be necessarily concerned at face value, but it's just okay, this is what should draw your eye and cause further investigation. It doesn't mean there's actually anything wrong necessarily until a little bit more digging is done. The other thing that we're assuming as we talk through these blood markers is that you're having your blood count and your metabolic panel done. These are the panels that pretty much always get run as a baseline. So if you're working with a doctor or a coach or anyone else to get your blood checked, these are always done. They're the cheapest because everybody has them done. It's like you do these, then you do things on top. And so the CBC, this complete blood count, is it's your total count of your red blood cells, your hemoglobin, all the different types of white blood cells, and also the formation and quality of your red blood cells, etc. So it gives us an idea of how are the white and red blood cells doing. And then the metabolic panel is going to be basically a quick overview of how your organs are doing. So how your kidneys seem to be, how does your liver seem to be, and those types of things. It's good for general health checking. You should always run it because when those numbers get wildly skewed, then it should draw the attention. If you have crazy high white blood cell count, you either just got sick and you're getting over it, a cold or something, or you have cancer. So again, there's a bigger context. If you got your white blood cells assessed when you had COVID and felt like death 4 years ago, or who you know who you are, you probably had crazy white blood cell count, really, really high. It's just as high as someone who has cancer. Mm-hmm. And so understand there's a context, crazy. And the other thing is, labs aren't perfect, and sometimes they return values that are just plain not accurate. They're doing the best that they can, but like any other thing in the world, there's quality control, and they do their best. And sometimes you just have to retest. And so if you get a crazy value and your doctor, your coach says like, hey, I need you to go in again for another test because this is a little crazy, that's not the time to be concerned about anything whatsoever yet, because it could just be a problem in lab values. I've seen this before with clients where we do a test and it's like, that seems a little crazy. We have it tested a couple weeks later and everything's just fine again. And it was probably just an abnormality in the lab values. Don't know why. Doesn't matter. You kind of move on. So these are not in any particular order. These are just general, these are all the things that we like to see added for most of the population to assess general health. So starting with fasting glucose, which is easy to test at home, but it's really good to have it tested at the same time as other things we're going to get into. Amanda, do you want to maybe talk through like what fasting glucose means, its limitations, and like how should someone be looking at their fasted glucose?
Yeah, fasting glucose is very much a fluctuating thing to be tested. So you're going to have a lot of variation throughout the day, unlike some other lab values, which may be more consistent over time. Your glucose in general will be changing all the time based on when you ate, what you ate, things like that. So fasting glucose obviously is talking about you haven't had anything to eat for 8 to 12 hours. That's when you're getting it tested. And so if you have a high fasting glucose, it's an early sign of insulin resistance. It doesn't necessarily mean you have insulin resistance, because you need to look at the trends over time. It could just mean like, oops, you ate something after midnight and you didn't really mean to. And you went and got your glucose tested, which people do all the time. They forget they're going to have labs done and then they have a little snack and they're like, uh-oh.
I've seen it from people putting cream in their coffee, and I'll tell them like, hey, don't eat anything. And I also tell them don't drink coffee, but sometimes they do anyway. And they put some cream in their coffee, and it might not even be sweetened creamer. There's still carbs in the coffee. You're still going to you could get something. So like, it's doesn't necessarily mean anything's wrong. It just means like, hey, check this out.
Right.
Of course, if you come back and you did genuinely fast and it's like 150, then okay, maybe there's something going on.
Yeah. And if you're concerned about it, you can always pick up one of those monitors super cheap at like CVS or Walmart and just start checking it.
Yeah. Well, the testing kits. Yeah. Not the monitors.
Yeah. The testing kits.
There are companies that sell you continuous glucose monitors for like $100 a month, by the way. I don't recommend pretty much anybody get them because you're just going to get all in your head about what's going on. You have no idea how much your blood glucose wildly moves all over the place, especially after you eat a meal. And it freaks a bunch of people out because they think like, oh, I can't believe my glucose is spiking, blah, blah, which spiking is such a stupid pejorative term that's been like bandied about in social media. Anyway, don't worry about it. It does all sorts of funky stuff when you just ate a meal. That's normal. That's good. That's your body doing its job. It's not bad for you. A spike is a lot better than an elongated curve. That's what actually causes insulin resistance.
Yeah. Insulin resistance can be shown if you're always getting a fasting glucose that's high, but a one-time thing I wouldn't really be all that concerned about unless it's like just a huge number. This is one that I think will vary on optimal range that's given from lab to lab. Some labs will say up to 99 fasting glucose is normal. Most are going to say, below 85 is really where you want to be. But that's going to vary a lot. If you just see like this huge number, like 150, 200, maybe continue to check back later. But I wouldn't be too alarmed if it's like just near 100 or something like that. So it can be insulin resistance. It can be a sign of inflammation. It can be, that you have had just a lot more refined sugars lately than you had before. Yeah. So even if you
drink a bunch the night before, it's going to probably be off.
Yeah. Or had a bad night's sleep. Like,
if you don't sleep well, like one bad night's sleep, you're basically type 2 diabetic for the day.
Yep.
It's very, very significant. And the other thing too is, since you're having this test in the morning, you could be someone who's subject to dawn effect, which is cortisol release as you wake up in the morning, which results in glucose release in the bloodstream from the liver. You're going to have higher glucose for a little while. It's basically you're not fasted anymore. Like you are, but you aren't. But as far as your glucose values go, you aren't. And so like that can also be in play, and it's not a bad thing. It's kind of a fairly genetic thing as far as we can tell. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. It just means you should find out, do a little bit more investigating. It's worth like checking 2 or 3 hours after a lean lunch or something like that, seeing what your glucose does and seeing like where it settles in after certain kinds of meals. So it becomes more nuanced. If you want to investigate this further, probably easiest is go on Amazon or go on Walmart, get a glucose testing kit. They're really cheap. They're like $20, and they come with like 100 lancets and testing strips. You can read about how to use them. It takes you 2 minutes, and you can get it. You can check it at home, no problem. What you want to do is check it about 2 hours after a lean meal. That's generally going to be a pretty good indicator of what your glucose is. Or check it when you first wake up in the morning. And you can even check it like later in the morning if you skip breakfast, which can be worth doing for something like this, to see like to assess dawn effect. What you want to do is see that your glucose goes up after you wake up, and then it comes back down, an hour or two later, and then you'd be like, okay, that's probably all that's happening. Everything's fine. And again, skipping breakfast if you're doing this properly. I would also skip caffeine or any stimulants, any calorie sources whatsoever. And I think this naturally segues into our next one, because these two should be interpreted in context with each other, which is fasting insulin. It's not often tested. I do wish more doctors tested it. In fact, I kind of care about fasting insulin more than I care about fasting glucose, because you can check glucose anytime, but you need a lab to check insulin. And if someone's fasting glucose is high, it doesn't mean much if I don't also know what their insulin is, including the greater context. But we're ultimately trying to infer insulin levels based on when they ate and what time of day it is. So like what we're looking for with fasting insulin is that just like fasting glucose, it's low. So what does your insulin value return to between meals as a baseline just to keep you functioning? Because insulin doesn't go to zero. If it goes to zero, you die. Because like your brain runs on carbs and it needs insulin for that. Like you do, and it's also the key to like every metabolic pathway in the body that involves energy expenditure, et cetera. By the way, for all the like keto zealots out there, eating protein increases your insulin too. So be very scared. But it basically what we're looking for though is that fasting insulin is low, and the lab value, the ranges are actually pretty good. Usually you can go by those. You honestly kind of want to be fairly on the low side, because that means that your body has to produce very little insulin to keep you at a baseline level of, energy. I hate the term glucose disposal. I think that's goofy, but of like glucose, shall we say, utilization, storage, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, basically what insulin is, it's a hormone. Insulin's a hormone that is the transporter of glucose into the cells. So if you are releasing a lot of insulin and you have a normal glucose level, that means your insulin hormones are working really hard to get the glucose where it's supposed to go. So that would show up as an elevated insulin level. So you can see how you can come back with a normal glucose level but still have insulin resistance because your insulin's just running around like crazy. You really want to have just enough insulin to deal with the glucose and not anymore. Yeah. So, there's always going to be some running around in your system. It's a much better indicator, though, of insulin resistance. It's a much better indicator of potential polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS. It's a much better indicator of even your activity level, because insulin and muscle and glucose, those are all so closely related. And honestly, the more muscle mass you put on, the better your insulin sensitivity is going to be, and you're going to have better fasted insulin levels. Yeah.
And I think, so one to tease out why we think it's kind of a better marker is because you can have fasting glucose be right where it should be and have high fasting insulin, because that's what it takes to keep you in a normal range. That's like, it's like pre-diabetes, basically. Like your pancreas is working overtime because the insulin receptors are so resistant. You can still kind of keep it under control. But then it's going to turn into something else later on down the road if it's not dealt with. And that's when, the trailing indicator is going to be that fasting glucose then comes up later on, along with the fasting insulin. And that's when we have a more serious problem where now the pancreas can't even produce enough insulin to manage healthy blood glucose levels. So if I was to test one or the other, I would be doing fasting insulin. But I really like, because it's a snapshot. These levels are changing all the time, but I would prefer to have both done at the same time if possible, because they kind of need to be interpreted in context with each other, especially in light of the fact that like they're always changing. You have, a piece of candy, which might only be like 20 calories. Your insulin and glucose are going to be high for the next 20 minutes, probably. Or whatever other meal you can think of, or drink a little bit of juice or anything like that. And so like, it's fine if you like, in fact, I've been curious about like chugging orange juice and then having these two tested, because I'd kind of like to see what's going on. Like this got mostly out of curiosity, but it almost doesn't matter as long as it resolves eventually into healthy fasting levels.
Yeah. And just to clarify real quick, like I've heard of doctors doing this sometimes when people ask for fasting insulin, they'll say, oh yeah, let's check your A1C. It's not the same as A1C. So
It's not.
Fasting insulin specifically is what you need to either get or ask for from your doctor. I've heard that happen with a few people now they'll just be like, oh yeah, let's just check your A1C. It's not the same thing.
Yeah, A1C is an indicator of how much. Then we're not going to talk about A1C because it's often used, and honestly, I don't think it's nearly as relevant as these two. And the reason I say that is, like, I have personally experienced having elevated A1C at a time when I knew my insulin, by fasting glucose and insulin at that same time, was really good, because I was eating a high carb diet because I was gaining weight on purpose, but my insulin sensitivity was excellent. I had great fasting glucose in the morning, and I even checked my fasting insulin, and it was almost at the bottom of the range in the morning. So like, and I do have some dawn effect naturally. So like, but my A1C was like 6 or something. So like A1C is one of those kind of nuanced things. It's like, well, you don't know if it means anything till you check glucose and insulin. So why bother? I mean, it is worth checking. Like I do like checking it for type 2 diabetics against baseline, because we want to know where those numbers are moving on average, but it is very limited. And yeah, again, if you ask your doctor about it, that's a great point. Make sure you make it clear. I'm not talking about A1C. I'm talking about fasting insulin. Almost no doctors know to do this. And a lot will probably be open to trying it. I don't think you're going to get pushback in general. But like, I mean, I like I said, I've talked to doctors, and most of them don't really, it just doesn't occur to them. And then when they think about it, they're like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. So also kind of related, since we're talking about metabolic health, triglycerides, which is also going to be a bit nuanced. So triglycerides, I don't really care about, the more I learn, the less I care about HDL, LDL. We're not going to really talk about it because those are even more nuanced. But triglycerides, two things tend to elevate triglycerides. One, insulin resistance. And this is happening. And so the thing that the mechanism that elevates them can be, kickstarted or kicked off or pushed by the same sort of state. So you're either insulin resistant or you're on a diet and you're losing weight. Both of these are cases in which the body is liberating fats more rapidly, so beta oxidation is cranked up for the purpose of moving what you have stored in, all over your body into the muscles, and being liberated into the bloodstream. So triglycerides are basically raw fat energy that's circulating in blood that can actually enter your muscle and everywhere else, not everywhere else, but most other target tissues, and be utilized for energy expenditure. Triglycerides specifically get elevated when you have insulin resistance because the muscles are not getting enough glucose, basically, regardless of the fact that you still have high insulin and high glucose. It's just not working right. And so to restore energy balance, your body will convert the beta cells into triglycerides slowly, and you're going to wind up with high triglycerides. So it can be a really strong indicator of metabolic disease, potentially. However, if you are losing weight and on a diet, especially the more aggressive the diet is, particularly if your carbs are cranked way down, which is what you're normally doing when you diet, it's gonna look the same. You might have very high triglycerides under those conditions as well, because you're like, that's literally what you're trying to do. You're trying to put fats that you're storing in your body into the blood so they can be burned by your muscles. Well, the only way that happens if it's elevated in your blood. So it doesn't necessarily mean something horrible is happening. It just has to be interpreted with a greater context. So if your doctor sees high triglycerides, hopefully they're asking you questions like, have you lost weight recently? What's your diet look like? Have you made any dietary changes and those types of things? So like a high fat diet does tend to elevate it, but only because you're eating high fats and that's where you're getting all your energy from. I actually, not that I'm a fan of a high fat diet, none of us are, but I'm not concerned about someone's metabolic health because they have high triglycerides and they're eating keto. It's going to be more like, okay, well, that's like how that works. Yeah. So that's what I would expect. It only
makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These three that we've already talked about are some of the most confusing, even though they're some of the most commonly tested. Well, maybe with the exception of insulin, not as commonly tested, but I think, and this is also probably why so many people are jumping on keto diets. There's this huge disconnect between carbs and fats in our minds. And so triglycerides are a type of fat that's found in the blood, but anything you see with GLYC is going to be having to do with sugars. So triglycerides is caused by eating really, really high carbs or insulin resistance that doesn't know how to deal with those carbs, or, then fatty liver disease. Wait a minute, fat's not a carb. Why does it have to do with that? This is this huge disconnect with people, and they're like, I'll try keto because I need to lower my sugar, and then they end up being insulin resistant. So these, I think we just need to remove it from our American brains that one or the other is more beneficial, high carb or high fat or whatever it is. You just have to have the right balance to keep all of these things in line.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and if you look at a trajectory of what the American diet has done over the last 50 years as we've become more insulin resistant, protein sources have remained. We eat about the same amount of protein, pretty much have since post-World War II. Carbs and sugars are actually about the same. We eat more refined sugars, but if you look at the whole carb package, it's actually pretty similar. The big change is we eat way more fats. Fats consumption has basically doubled. And on top of that, the kinds of fats we eat tend to be more pro-inflammatory. And those are the two major changes. So we've added fats to the diet, received worse outcomes because we're still eating all the carbs and everything else. And so that's kind of what you get. But anyway, be sure to interpret these in context. There's a whole lot else that could be said in them. So we might even do a deep dive into some of these individually, take some detailed notes and everything. Because they can be pretty nuanced. And it's actually a careful discussion, what triglycerides are actually really doing and that kind of thing. But at a high level, that's kind of how it works. The next couple we're going to talk about are thyroid related, which can be, of course, driven by metabolic disease. It's obviously going to be a common theme in this whole podcast. But TSH specifically, so TSH stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone is released by the hypothalamus, and it is what tells the thyroid to make T4, which is the less active version of thyroid hormone. It's not, they used to be called inactive. It actually does do some stuff in the body, but it is less bioavailable, less bioactive. TSH is like the driver behind telling the thyroid how much iodine basically to convert into T4. And a lot of things can lower it or elevate it. But it's a good first initial pass at assessing thyroid health. And most Americans should probably have it done. In fact, in some cases, all you have to do to resolve a TSH issue is add iodine to your diet or another supplement such as copper or selenium or something like that. We're not going to go do a deep dive into that. I think we'll probably do a thyroid diagnosis podcast at a later time. But TSH gives you an idea of how high does your brain think it needs to crank up your thyroid, because not getting enough, or it thinks there's too much. And it does downregulate dynamically with diet as well. This is particularly driven by carbs. And so that's why some people on like keto carnivore type diets, they actually end up with thyroid dysfunction because the thyroid downregulates so much that it eventually, I don't know that atrophy is the right word, but it seems to sort of shut down, and sometimes it has a hard time coming back online. And that actually is what happened with me when I tried that diet a long, long time ago. But at the same time, so if you're dieting or anything like that, eventually part of that resistance that you get to weight loss is the thyroid downregulating metabolism. Now, it's not as significant as a lot of people want to think it is. It's like, I believe around 7 to 10% at most. And that is when you're deep in a diet. Like, it's not like the thyroid shuts down. A lot of people want to think like, 3 months into my diet, my thyroid shut down. I stopped losing weight. And it's like, well, a bunch of things downregulated, thyroid among them.
Yeah, right.
But thyroid was responsible for like just barely letting off the gas pedal and how much fat you're losing. It's not, you actually feel it more than anything else. It's more psychological, I think, than physical. Wouldn't you say, Amanda?
Yeah, a lot of the slowdown in diet, this is something Bill and I talked about on our last episode, actually. A lot of that slowdown is things that you are not aware that you're actually doing. Like you're fatigued with your diet, so you're snacking a little bit, and you don't really realize it, or you're not logging it, or your activity is lower because you're tired, and so things are just, not moving quite as fast. It's a lot more in your head, or things that you're not necessarily aware of.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of things are also like just downstream of thyroid. And so if like your thyroid is starting to downregulate, you're going to have downregulated sex hormones. You're going to probably have some cortisol if you've been like really stressed trying to diet for a long time. And there's other things too. So it's not just your thyroid is like kicking you in the butt. There are a lot of other things going on when that starts getting downregulated, because everything's so connected.
And your cortisol goes up, your dopamine goes down, et cetera. Like, it's the challenge of dieting. People think that it's physiological, like because the slowdown and all that stuff. It's more psychological than anything else. You can diet for a really, really long time and it still works. It's just that you feel more and more low energy and brain fog because your body's like kind of gets to a point where it's had enough. And then eventually your brain gets to the point where you've had enough. And that periodization is important for those reasons. You can, and by the way, chronic extreme dieting can cause damage to your thyroid. This happens to women who struggle with under eating and things like that, and being over conscious about their weight and stuff. It is a real thing. Some women are on thyroid replacement pretty much for life, although I think you can kickstart it in most cases. But some women are on thyroid replacements because they started under eating in their teenage years, which is, I think, particularly damaging. And they carry that through their 20s and 30s. And by the time they're 40, it's like their thyroid basically doesn't do much of anything anymore. And they kind of have to. And so what's going to follow that is T4 and T3 production. So we did put T4 and T3 on this list. I do want to give an honorable mention, I guess, to reverse T3, which is mostly an issue in women. I've tested it for myself, just because I was curious. I have not seen a man have a problem with it. Now, I know that it does happen. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It's just way less common, and something I don't normally check. It'd be like when we're really trying to figure out what a problem is for someone. But you can have, and this is the case for me because I'm hypothyroid. My TSH, if I come off a thyroid replacement, I'll go back to baseline. My TSH will go way out of range. It'll go to like well beyond the upper end of the range. And my T4 production will tank because my thyroid cannot keep up with the demand that's placed on it. And of course, T3 will follow. So what you have is TSH driving thyroid T4 production. And the mostly thyroid, but also the liver a little bit, has enzymes that convert T4 to 3, that convert, easy for me to say, T4 into T3. And T3 is the very active form. I don't want to say the active form because it's more nuanced than that, but is the most active form of thyroid hormone. And that's what is binding to basically tissues all over your body. There are very few, there are probably more, like there are probably almost no tissues that don't have a thyroid receptor. T3 basically it is a hormone, and it basically signals for lack of a better term, burn calories. Like it's basically the like gas pedal or the throttle or whatever you want to say on like how fast is the system running. This is why if someone's ever been on total thyroid replacement and you take too much T3, you get really hot. And this is why bodybuilders, not that I'm saying you should do this, but this is why bodybuilders do utilize T3 sometimes for fat loss, because it does accelerate fat loss. It does work, but it can also shut your thyroid down faster than anything else, especially in women. So I'm not recommending anyone do it. I'm just saying that this is what people do. But what can happen is some of the conversion of T4 to T3 can be converted to what we call reverse T3. And this is where basically the molecule is, for lack of a better term, sort of in reverse from what it should be when it's converted. And this is just like a thyroid dysfunction thing. A lot of things can cause it. This can be related to direct thyroid dysfunction. It can also, sometimes it appears to be driven by metabolic disease, so that like your TSH is right where it should be, your T4 is right where it should be, but a bunch of the T3 you're converting is basically useless. Mm-hmm. It's not doing much of anything because reverse T3 is, as far as we can tell, does very little, if anything at all, which takes away from how much real T3 you're getting to get the job done.
Yeah, the thyroid is very much like a gas and brake system, and constantly working to find this stable zone that you're supposed to be in. Like the body fights change, and this is one of the mechanisms in which that happens. So you can have, just speaking of reverse T3, you can have normal TSH, normal T4 levels, and still be having some issues that could be related to the reverse T3. So these, I mean, TSH, T3, T4, reverse T3, these are all going to have a lot to do with cortisol, with like adrenal dysfunction or things like that, and overall your metabolism and energy. So a lot of times when people are chronically fatigued, this is one of the first things that they want to look at is all of these thyroid levels to see if there's something that's going on there. Can be an indicator of autoimmune disorders like Hashimoto's. So if you do find that your levels over time show consistent with something that could be an autoimmune disorder, best thing to do for that is begin an anti-inflammatory diet. Honestly, most of us should be on an anti-inflammatory diet in the first place. I mean, why would you want to intentionally cause inflammation? But you do have to be much more careful when you have.
So good.
I know ice cream's delicious. But things like, antioxidant rich things, dark berries, stuff like that are really good too. Include leafy greens and lean meats, stuff like that.
Everybody take glycine.
Very anti-inflammatory. So
yeah, I think that's a great point. And so, if someone, if you're having trouble now, thyroid issues can drive sleep one way or the other too. Mm-hmm. You can have difficulty getting enough sleep, or you just don't fall asleep well, or you don't stay asleep very well, or you can just you could sleep 10 hours and you just wake up tired. So it can cause one or the other, and a bunch of other things can cause that too. It doesn't mean it's thyroid necessarily, but those are things that should generally be assessed for someone that's going through that kind of difficulty. And the other thing too is dysregulated circadian rhythms. So if you're not getting sunlight when you should, or enough of it, you might be getting everything else you need, but your thyroid is very circadian driven. In fact, to give someone an idea, TSH is actually pulsed usually around 2 or 3 a.m. So once you've been asleep for about 5 hours or so, 4 or 5 hours, you get a TSH pulse, which results in an immediate T4 pulse that's immediately to follow. And the T3 conversion is just this steady thing that happens in the background. Now, that pulse, if you're staying up late or something like that, or you only get 5 hours of sleep, guess what? The pulse is much reduced. And then the following night, it's also probably going to be reduced. Keep in mind, this can have a big effect. The other thing too is lack of red light, actually even to the thyroid directly, can be associated with certain things like nodules forming, Hashimoto's, and things like that. The cool thing about thyroid replacement compared to sex hormone replacement, particularly in men, is it doesn't shut you down. You actually can add to your existing production in many cases. and it may downregulate your natural production a little bit, but it's usually not the total shutdown that we see from like administering very small doses of testosterone, for example. So that is kind of a good thing about it, that like if someone uses it for a while and then doesn't or anything like that, then usually they're going to be okay if you were to stop later on, because it's not quite as, I don't want to say it's not as permanent of a downregulation or anything like that. However, if you supplement T3, that does downregulate you very rapidly. And so that's usually something that's going to be some. You don't want to play with T3 lightly. First line of defense with thyroid replacement should generally be T4, unless you know that like someone has Hashimoto's or something like that. And the way to preserve the thyroid in most cases, if you have Hashimoto's or nodules or anything like that, is to begin supplementation immediately, because a slightly functioning thyroid is a lot easier to live with than a not at all functioning thyroid. So like my thyroid is not that functional, but it still does some stuff. My conversion works just fine, no issues there. If that wasn't the case, I would have to have a perfectly dialed in T4 dose and T3 dose. And by the way, those like to change dynamically. So you might be fine for a while and then you start feeling bad again. You have to do blood work again, go figure it out. And often this involves months of experimentation. So the way that you sort of preserve thyroid function once you're having issues can be to supplement T4 for a while, which doctors readily prescribe. You're not going to have any issues here. And then maybe you can take care of the lifestyle issues and come off later. Mm-hmm. That's actually generally very safe to do and fine to do. That's actually what I did in my mid-20s. And then eventually, by the time I got into my 30s, my thyroid was like, yeah, no, we're not going to do this anymore. But it's not totally shut down. It still works for the most part. So I don't have to be perfect all the time about my dosage. I know what kind of works for me, but it's not that big of a deal. And it's also worth noting that if you supplement T4, it has a long half-life. It's about 9 to 10 days. So if you miss a night when you're taking it, it's fine. Don't worry about it. You probably won't notice the difference whatsoever. All right, let's move on.
This is why those who have real quick who have had their thyroids removed, which is a surprising number of people actually, have to be testing this so often, because your thyroid and the way your pituitary gland communicates with your thyroid is constantly changing. Yeah. And if you're having to do that manually, basically, because you don't have a thyroid with medication, you have to make the adjustments. So that's why it's really important to have those as part of the blood markers, especially if you don't have a thyroid tested more often.
Yeah. And that's not to compare it to type 1 diabetes, but because type 1 diabetes, if I was going to pick one or the other, I definitely would have a dysfunctional thyroid. But I would still say you don't have the benefit of continuous T3 monitoring or something like that. So you have to just get one stop, check moment in time. So it can be very complicated to assess. If a type 1 diabetic has their blood glucose and it's 200, well, they probably know exactly how many IUs it takes to bring them down to 100. That's like of insulin. You can pretty much know. We don't get that benefit with the thyroid. And so dialing in, it can be very challenging. The next thing I want to mention, excuse me, is cystatin C. Now, I bring this up because many of our audience are training and also supplementing creatine, which I recommend everyone in the world take creatine, whether you train or not, because of just the cognitive benefits alone are massive. The health benefits, you'll probably live longer, etc. Don't need to keep trying to sell it, but if you're not taking creatine, take at least 5 grams a day. Do it. Just do it. But if you are taking it, or you're just muscular from training, and by the way, not that muscular. You don't have to be like huge for your creatinine values to be high, which is generally used for to assess kidney function. Someone that's just been training for like a year or two steady. And, if it's a guy, some guy that has they're squatting 300 pounds, or they're, deadlifting 300 something, maybe 400 pounds. For a woman, I would equate this to like, maybe she's deadlifting in the 200s. She's benching over 100, etc. She's probably far more muscular than average. And so creatinine levels are going to look elevated, which is going to make the calculated EGFR, which is you can't actually assess EGFR, but it's the glomerular filtration rate of the kidney, which means how good is the kidney filtering stuff. Well, if you're filtering more creatine than normal, or creatinine, then guess what? It's going to look like your kidney is not working right.
Right.
So anybody that's training, including even runners, by the way, you shouldn't really be paying much attention to the creatinine EGFR values. What you want to do is assess your cystatin C. Cystatin C is a protein found in blood that is not manipulated by having high muscle mass, not manipulated by high activity levels, and not manipulated by supplementing creatine. So it's generally a very, very good assessment of how well your kidney is functioning, absent, without being able to be manipulated by those other things that people who are healthy should do. So again, this is a snapshot of what we kind of said earlier. General population lab values are based on averages. Creatinine being high is not necessarily bad. Cystatin C being really high can be very bad. So what you want to do if you get your cystatin C checked, and most doctors are aware of it and they don't mind testing it. Insurance may fight on it, but get it done if you can, or get it done on your own. Not a big deal. It's not usually very expensive. It's $30 or $40 typically, I believe. And what you do with this basically is you just go Google like free EGFR cystatin C calculator. The best ones will have you put in your body mass, so how much you weigh, how tall you are, and your cystatin C and something else. What? No, I don't think it's albumin. It's something else. I forget. Anyway, those ones will put out a pretty good number. And you want your EGFR to be above 100 generally. It should be for most people who don't have a history of any disease that would be compromising the kidney, such as diabetes, high blood pressure, that kind of thing. But just very important for those of you that are training, that have elevated muscle mass and supplementing creatine. Most doctors these days do seem to be informed on elevated creatinine for people that are, athletic at all. And so we don't see doctors freaking out about kidney disease from what I've seen lately. As soon as you tell them that you train, they'll be like, oh, okay, this makes total sense. And so like you at least don't have the freaking out about, let's get you assessed for kidney disease, because 10 years ago that would have been the response in most cases. But I think the word's gotten around pretty well. A lot of them don't know to then check cystatin C, so it's worth bringing up, and they'll often assess you for it without having much trouble at all. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to this, Amanda.
Yeah, with this and really most things having to do with the kidneys, if you're doing your bodybuilding duty and carrying your gallon of water around,
Right.
you're good. You're fine.
Yeah.
Stay hydrated. Don't avoid unnecessary medications, because all of that gets filtered through liver and kidneys. Like, stay hydrated. Don't take things you're not needing, and generally you'll be okay. So if you're already doing that and these numbers are coming out in concerning ranges, then have that more looked at. But first, address the hydration and, especially things like NSAIDs. If you're a chronic user of NSAIDs, then try to cut those out.
Yeah, cut them out anyway, but definitely check. And for most people, I only recommend checking this like once a year. It doesn't need to be done both times a year that you do blood work, but once a year, I think is plenty adequate for the average person. Unless, again, you have some sort of history of kidney disease or history of other health complications that may have compromised your kidney in some way. The other one is going to be testosterone. We actually had probably a 10-minute debate on what sex hormones to assess, but we said 10, so we're going to give you 10. My thought on this is that testosterone is the best assessment for men and women of what's going on with sex hormones. Obviously, in women, it can be particularly more complicated than that. But if a woman has good testosterone values, often the other markers are less relevant and or will be just fine. And so we don't really care. Testosterone's like, in men and women, it's the first thing to go when you have a sex hormone issue. And so like you might want to do follow-up tests to check some other things. But for just a good baseline, annual checkup type of thing, especially once you're, I would say, over 30, or you just suspect there's a problem, it's okay to just have it done. Best to find out. I actually would have liked to have known, like, what were my testosterone levels when I was younger. I'd like to see this be more of a standard test. Like, what was my testosterone at 20? Like, what was yours? What was Emily's? We don't really know because it wasn't done. So, like, I actually think it's really because of how prevalent thyroid, that too, but testosterone replacement therapy is. It'd be nice to know, like, was I okay before, or have I always been on the low side? Because symptoms don't present typically until you're really, really low. and you might have never had that good anyway, like, or were you really good before, and then like this life event happened that you could correlate. There's a lot of reasons why, even if you don't suspect there's a problem, it's good to have a baseline. And I wouldn't even have it checked annually. Just like have it done when you're younger. That's great. If you're 20, 25, 30, whatever it is, like go have it checked. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to do anything about it, but then you know what it was at that point in time, so that if there are issues down the road, you know what your healthy baseline was at one time. And you might also find you have really low testosterone, like, oh, maybe that's why I feel tired and have brain fog all the time. And it's kind of, I don't want to repeat what we said on our testosterone video too much, but like sexual dysfunction is not necessarily caused by low testosterone. And if you have low testosterone, sexual function is often like the last thing to go. You're going to deal with memory, brain fog, motivation, energy issues, typically long before you notice any kind of real sexual dysfunction. That is like, if you have sexual dysfunction from low testosterone, you probably had low testosterone for years and should have been on replacement probably years before. It's like, that's when you're in danger mode, basically.
This is one that is not included at an early enough age. I definitely would agree with you on that. I don't believe my husband had his run until he was 42, and we asked for it. So it really should be a standard thing. And having a baseline is really important. And this is good across all the hormones. But of course, just speaking about testosterone right now, a lot of the standard practices, somebody comes in depressed and they're fatigued and they can't sleep. And then instead of checking testosterone, the doctor prescribes an SSRI.
Right.
And that is incredibly damaging. Will also tank your testosterone even more. So it's definitely something to check. And that's not saying because you're depressed and fatigued and not sleeping that it is definitely a testosterone issue. But before prescribing medication of any kind, it's best to rule anything out that
how about you go find out?
You possibly can.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't want to throw back too hard to our previous supplement thing, our podcast, but lion's mane, guess what? It's not going to fix this either.
No.
A lot of people, I've seen people post online and say things like, oh, my hormones were messed up, I took lion's mane and it fixed it. Well, one, basically nobody's saying that has ever had their hormones checked in blood work whatsoever. But even if you had, lion's mane will typically reduce testosterone because it is basically a weak natural SSRI that's also hepatotoxic. So fine to take for a short amount of time. If you want to take it for a week or two, don't go past that though, because you can, I have had clients develop erectile dysfunction from just taking lion's mane. They stopped taking lion's mane and it totally went away. And by the way, the particular individual I'm thinking about was on testosterone replacement. He had plenty of testosterone. And the SSRI actually had such a profound effect on him that he actually developed like basically total sexual dysfunction. So SSRIs, lion's mane, take it seriously and try to assess everything and very, very be very cautious about SSRI. I would basically never take an SSRI myself. But I honestly wish they would just go away. I don't see much redeeming use for them. Yeah.
There is still a little bit of mantra, I guess, around that says like women don't need testosterone or like it's not worth checking or anything like that. But I would just go against that all day long. It's just like they obviously the ranges are so much different for men than for women, and you need such a smaller amount. Yeah. But it is showing to be like cancer protective in a lot of areas. Yeah. It's even shown. I saw a study a few weeks ago that said like it even helped with PMS and period pain. The higher your testosterone, like the better periods you have. Like it's not bad to have good healthy levels. You don't want super physiological levels. You don't want it too low. But I think part of the reason it's worth checking for health more than estrogen and progesterone is because of how it makes you feel. It has a similar feeling when you're low to when you have low thyroid, and you just feel awful when it's low. Yeah. And so even just the feeling of having good testosterone levels is going to encourage better health in like so many other areas.
Yeah.
Testosterone seems to reduce the risk of basically like all the cancers that are unique to women, breast cancer and ovarian cancer, and even PCOS and things like that. So it is vitally important to women's well-being, but also for like how long you might live, particularly women who are peri or postmenopausal. the numbers are really, really like strong as far as outcomes with cancer risk for women, especially the cancers that are unique to women.
I'd really like to see.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, particularly women who are taking other hormones in conjunction. So, like, I'm pretty much of the opinion anymore that you should basically never prescribe a woman estrogen for replacement without also prescribing testosterone, because estrogen alone can increase stroke risk and cancer risk in women. Whereas if you take testosterone, it completely seems to eliminate that risk. And if anything, provide a massive health benefit for a litany of reasons. But the outcomes are wildly different for women that are on both.
Yeah, I would really like to see, and I do think it is trending this way, I would like to see more importance placed on the perimenopausal time, not waiting until post-menopausal to really start looking at these and when hormone replacement therapy might be beneficial. A lot of times it would be in the perimenopausal phase. Probably not to the same amount, probably would affect how much you need later if you start early enough. And especially because, at least in my generation, a lot of women were on birth control for so long, and that, without a doubt, has done something to the testosterone level that they carry after they're off of it. So, it's very much an indicator of what the rest of your hormones are doing. Particularly those women that were put on, which is a lot of women. If you're put on birth control at like 15 or 14 or whatever, there's a lot of girls, like, the practice is, oh, you got your period, time to put you on birth control.
It's so bad.
That is, it's basically chemical castration. It is chemical castration. And so, like, it messes with your development in a lot of ways that we don't fully understand. And if that was your history, then I strongly recommend getting your testosterone assessed either way. Because, like, that could be why you don't feel good.
And a lot of your testosterone is produced from your ovaries, and basically birth control is suppressing ovarian function in one way or another, depending on what you're on. So think about doing that as a teenager when you're still developing. Sometimes it has, like, lifelong effects.
Yeah, definitely. So the other ones we have in here are ALT, AST. These are assessments of liver function. And these are specifically enzymes, basically, that are spilled over into blood after they've been doing their thing. Basically, it's think of it as like a used up enzyme, a byproduct of enzymatic activity in the liver. And so AST specifically will be high in those if you're training really hard. So if you're prepping for a meet or you're training really hard as a bodybuilder or anything like that, just muscle turnover and muscle protein synthesis cause elevated AST. It's not cause for alarm. If you're training hard and your AST comes back and it's 70 or something like that, and the range shows 40, that's okay. I'm not concerned about that whatsoever. If it gets above 100, that's when we start going, okay, what's going on here? But it is worth noting that, like, elevated AST for someone that's training is not a bad thing. It just means your body's doing its job, and it's not enough to cause a problem in that if that's what's driving it. ALT is what we want to generally look at a little more closely. This is elevated from a lot of common drug use, such as Tylenol, and Tylenol is actually a big one. Or just drinking and other things like that. Anything where the liver has to work really, really hard, that's what elevates ALT and can actually, like, reveal, okay, this is a significant liver stress and we want to do something about it. And by the way, drinking lots of water and just stopping whatever you're doing, it'll typically go away and be just fine. It doesn't take long to resolve. You can test, today, and if it's high, and you're, drinking more than a couple times a week, and if you're taking Tylenol more than once a week, if you were to cease those, it's probably going to be back down to baseline in like 30 days. It moves very rapidly, and you can at least know, like, okay, that's what did it, and make the appropriate lifestyle changes. AST, I don't worry about as much, particularly for those that are training. ALT, and a good way to remember this is ALT, liver, right? Just a good idea of what's going on with the liver. AST, S, skeletal muscle. That's how I think about it. So, like, if I have a lot of skeletal muscle stress, then I know AST is probably going to be elevated. Slight Honorable mention to GGT, which is the other indicator of enzymatic activity in the liver, useful for assessing health if these are skewed and you kind of want to know a little bit more what's going under the hood, or to assess sort of general function of the liver, then you can go ahead and add that on there. But ALT, AST is totally fine to use in almost every case. GGT is more like if we want to do further assessment because we suspect a problem of some kind. Also, exposure to certain toxins too. So people that work around chemicals and things like that, you might also have elevated ALT and want to start taking steps to reduce your exposure to whatever the chemicals may be, whether you're a mechanic or you're on a farm or something like that, or a manufacturing facility.
Yeah, the liver, it's important to note, is like there's no liver detox that does anything. Your liver detoxes itself.
Yeah.
And it very much wants to heal and regenerate itself. So really, if there's any damage that has been caused, intentionally, unintentionally to your liver, just like you said, drink a lot of water, abstain from whatever that might be. If it's obviously a work environment, see how that could be remedied. I don't know, more fresh air, depending on what it may be that's causing it, is really important. And the ratio of these is also important, of AST to ALT. Certain ratios, like if ALT is a lot higher, could be non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which, again, if you fix the habits and your hydration and your stress, is very likely to reverse itself. Once you actually have scarring involved, then the AST may end up being a lot higher. At that point, the liver is much more difficult to heal and reverse. So it's good to catch these things early. And also, if your AST is a lot higher, it could signal alcoholic liver disease or even cirrhosis. So the ratio of the two is really important. So if you have habits that are causing this, for example, you binge drank too much, now you have a headache the next day, and now you took a Tylenol, quit that. So
that's like like you already smacked it around. You don't need to keep beating it up the next day. Like, you already made your point.
So bad.
We could go on these a little for a while, but I think that the one thing that's important to note, for the liver, is that it is like the most regenerating organ we probably have in its ability to heal. However, Amanda brought up a great point that if you have scar tissue formation, your body can't clear that. If part of it, you can have, like, the standard treatment for having like cancer of the liver or anything like that is just to remove that part of the liver, or a damaged portion of the liver. You can remove, I think it's up to 80% of the liver. You'll need 20% of it. It will regrow and be just fine. It might take a while. You might have reduced function for a while, have to watch what you eat, but it will actually regrow. But you can't clear scar tissue. Once that is formed, it is there forever and will permanently reduce liver function. There's not really much that can be done about it. It just stinks, and it is what it is. So, and that happens from typically the liver actually getting burned from acid buildup because of, like, basically byproducts of way overutilization of the enzymes in the liver. The liver does a lot of things, but one of the things about it is that it is full of enzymes that break things down, basically, and ALT, ST are good indicators of that. Vitamin D. We probably don't need to spend tons of time on this, and it's actually going to be related to the next one. But vitamin D gives you an idea of how much sunlight exposure you've been getting if you're not supplementing, and could tell you that you need more sunlight and or maybe to supplement vitamin D. One thing I'll say is, if you supplement vitamin D, always take vitamin K2, the MK7 formulation of it, because vitamin D is depleting K2, which can make your arteries stiffer and harder and more prone to plaque buildup long-term over many years. It doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen eventually. So you want to keep your K2 levels high anyway, and if you're taking vitamin D, that's why some supplements, by the way, they are vitamin D plus K2. They bundle them, and that's actually a really good move. So if you want it combined, just find a product like that. I take them separately, but that's different. So vitamin D, it does a lot of things in the body. We don't need to deep dive into all the things that it does. It used to be, people thought it was like just one or two things. It's actually anabolic. Like, if you have low vitamin D, your ability to build muscle mass is actually reduced. Your ability to recover is reduced. It's going to affect your circadian rhythm. It's going to affect how good you feel in general, your like energy levels and things like that. Like you might think you have low testosterone, low thyroid. Those are fine. You might still feel like crap. And that's just because you're not getting enough vitamin D. Supplementing does work, but nothing's quite like getting it naturally, of course. And so in either case, it should be assessed, particularly those of you living in northern climates that are cloudy a lot in the winter. Get it assessed. Some people only need to supplement in the winter, and then once springtime arrives and there's more sunlight, then it's okay to that's when you can just stop supplementing. In many cases, I stay on it year round, but I just feel good on it, and my levels are fine, so I don't worry about stopping anymore.
Yeah, and just
That's
real
very-
quick on that, just have in mind the time of year that you check it, because you are made to like build up the stores over the summer that should carry you through the winter. And so if you check it in March or end of February or something and it's pretty darn low, like you might want to start taking some, but don't freak out if it's like a significant amount lower than it was in like October. Like your body is made to carry those stores through the winter and then build it back up over the summer.
Yeah, and you do one thing too. It's not just vitamin D storage, but actually long-term vitamin D storage looks actually like melanin production. So if you get as tan as possible over the summer, your body actually breaks melanin down and converts it to vitamin D over the winter time. And so you do want that sunlight exposure in the winter. Can help you carry, or in the summer, I mean, it can help you carry through the winter as far as your vitamin D production is concerned. And cold exposure actually helps accelerate that conversion. So. In the winter, and you don't have to be freezing cold. Cold plunge obviously does it, but like just having your skin, a lot of your skin exposed to 50 degrees, or so, just cold enough, definitely helps with that conversion. So you want to be outside no matter what time of year it is, even if it's cloudy and there's no sunlight. If you did what you should during the summer and didn't wear sunglasses and got some degree of tan, which is the goal for health purposes, without burning, of course. Then it'll actually carry you through the winter and reduce your need for vitamin D supplementation.
Yeah, vitamin D is much more of a hormone than a vitamin. So even though it's called vitamin D, but just remember it's the sun vitamin, and most people are low on it. There is a level that can be toxic, but it's very, very hard to be toxic on vitamin D or that high of a level.
Unless you're me. I over respond to it. I have to be careful.
Yeah. Well, another reason to get it checked then. But this is also really important for those women of older ages because of bone density. So making sure you have a good level of vitamin D for bone density alongside the other ways you can improve that by adding muscle and, of course, getting everything else checked that we've already talked about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and our final, the top 10, is one that is rarely assessed. That is going to be your omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. Mm-hmm. This is very, very important and one of the stronger predictors of cardiovascular disease long term. And most people, their ratio is going to be way off because we eat, as Americans, tons of omega-6s and not much in the way of omega-3s. Omega-3s are going to come from things like, obviously, fish. But certain kinds of beef can actually be very high. Depending on the beef, the quality of the beef is very relevant. And by the way, interesting note, it seems like the more you spend, the more omega-3 you get, because Wagyu has the highest of all omega-3s. So Wagyu is for health.
You heard it here, ladies.
It's been prescribed.
But you can, so that aside, you can't, so I've said this before, I'll say it again. Use Wagyu beef tallow for pretty much all of your cooking. It is one of the highest omega-3 oil products you can use for cooking of all kinds. It tastes great on everything because it's freaking Wagyu fat, so you can't go wrong. And because it's Wagyu fat, it has a different texture. It's easy to work with because it doesn't harden that much at room temperature. It stays very pliable. A whole lot of great things about it. And in many cases, all you need to do to get your ratio where it should be is just stop using avocado oil and stop using olive oil and those types of things, which avocado oil is not bad for you, by the way. It's just that it doesn't contain much omega-3s. It's omega-6 dominant. It's just not as omega-6 dominant as like canola oil. But Wagyu, so far from what I've discovered, is Wagyu tallow specifically is the highest omega-3 that I have discovered. And actually, that's what I used in my blood work when I first discovered this. Was my ratios weren't great. They weren't awful, but they weren't great. I got right in the mid-range as soon as we just switched. The whole family, Emily switched with her cooking, and everything was fine. I don't drink fish oil. In fact, we don't eat that much fish. Sometimes we do seasonally. We don't avoid it. It's just it's not always that much in our diet, but I don't actually need it for these purposes because we get plenty from the Wagyu beef tallow, and it's not expensive either, by the way.
And we do eat eggs almost every morning, which eggs also have good omega-3s.
Yeah, particularly when they're home raised like ours. Yeah.
Right. We keep birds for that reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. The actual test for this is not all that common. You'd have to ask for it, and they do have to take it to certain labs. It's like a blood spot test. It's not quite the same. So it's something to have run, maybe not all the time, but periodically, maybe not every single year, but periodically, just to double check it. But this is, anything with omega-3 is what I call the expensive supplement. Fish is good, salmon's better, Wagyu beef tallow. This is the bougie supplement. So if it's hard to afford more of the foods that have high omega-3s, at least reduce the omega-6s because the ratio will be a lot better. I always shake my head when I see the omega-3, 6 supplements. I'm like, nobody needs to supplement in America.
Yeah, who needs omega? Find the American for me.
Yeah.
Find them that needs more omega-6. Who's I'm low on omega-6. Who's that person? Come on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, name one.
Maybe there's a grass-fed human out there. I don't know.
Vegans, maybe? No. They're not using beef tallow.
Well, that's the thing too about so vegans even they eat a lot of processed food because it's just so difficult to get not all of them. I know there's one out there listening, and good for you. But the rest of you vegans that are listening to this are probably eating quite a bit of processed food and probably not getting adequate omega-3s either. It's not just because someone's eating red meat or whatever else. All the processed foods you eat, anything that's processed basically that has any level of fat in it is going to be very high omega-6. That's the way it is. Omega-3s are more easily destroyed. The other thing I'll say too with supplementation is most fish oil products out there are junk and you have to pay for good ones. Most are already rancid and causing more problems than they're fixing. And they taste terrible. They smell terrible. They give you bad gas. They might give you bad breath. They might sit in your stomach heavy, that kind of thing. Implementing it into your diet via what oil you cook with and what foods you're eating is generally going to be just far more effective and frankly enjoyable.
Yeah. If you do have a high quality fish oil and you're still getting those kind of burps or whatever, keep it in the fridge. If you use it when it's cold, it reduces that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, some of the cheapest ways to get it would be actually sardines have some of the highest. Tuna actually has a really good amount if you like tuna sandwiches.
Sardines are acquired taste.
I like sardines, but keep tuna salad away from me and tuna sandwiches. That is,
but a lot of people really like them. Yeah, see,
I know. It's just anything like that that's swimming in mayonnaise and.
So I don't actually like the tuna, the canned tuna. I think that stuff's gross. But if you get a tuna steak and you cook it right, that's
tuna. Yeah, we used to do tuna steaks all the time. Actually, we haven't done it much lately. Why is that?
Because it's expensive.
Oh.
It's bougie, I told you.
It's really good though. So tuna, tuna, sushi, tuna, awesome. Yeah, but the canned stuff, I've used it for backpacking. That's about it, and that's always flavored. But you can get quite a bit from tuna. But I'll say usually for most people, the easiest way to just get more omega-3s, go get Wagyu beef tallow. It's on Amazon. It's at Costco. It's becoming more and more available. It's not very expensive. It's probably not going to increase your grocery budget much. If anything, maybe a few bucks, whatever. Often that's all you're going to need to do, and you don't need to change much else about your diet.
Yeah.
It's just a really quick and easy way to sort of fix everything. It also has a high smoke point. You don't have to worry about burning it as much. Come on. If anyone walks away from this podcast and doesn't order some Wagyu beef tallow, I don't know what's going on.
It's also a great alternative if you have seafood or shellfish type allergies because you
Which
can't.
is common. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you can't really get that level of omega-3 any other
Right.
way.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you
Yeah.
get your beef tallow and you reduce your ultra processed food intake, your ratios for omega-3 to 6 is going to be a lot better.
Right.
Yeah.
And just real quick, like why we care. Obviously, everybody knows it's anti-inflammatory, which is a good thing. We live in an inflammatory environment, but also the test actually takes a while because what they're doing is they're testing part of the lining of your cells, because the lining of your cells are made up of fats and they like a specific omega-3 to 6 ratio to stay flexible. Oh, that's the right word.
Malleable. would be a good-
Malleable. Yeah, maybe it's a better word to be.
And therefore resilient.
Right, and more resilient, so they can do all the things they're supposed to do, let in what they're supposed to let in, let out what they're supposed to let out. And so to keep your cells the proper structure, and think of how many cells are in your body, it likes to have a specific ratio of omega-3s and omega-6s. So they're actually testing part of the lining of your cell to see what the ratio is. So I think when we got our test done, it took like 2.5, 3 weeks to get the results back.
Yeah, it takes a while. And it's partly because they don't do that many. I think there's like if you look at where your results go, it's like everything goes to one lab, except for the omega-6, omega-3. That goes to some, because there's like one or two in the country that do it or something. I don't know. And the other thing, it positively manipulates other things that we didn't mention, like HDL, LDL. I would rather assess omegas before HDL, LDL, because HDL, LDL will follow healthy omega-3 to 6 ratios. And so and that's how you fix it. So like just check upstream and fix the thing that's upstream. The others will tend to right themselves, and this will reduce your risk of negative cardiovascular outcomes long term. Probably the best way for you to be looking at all the things that we mentioned. These, almost all of them, have to do with your heart health on some level. And the omega-3 to 6 ratio is a very, very strong predictor of whether you're going to deal with plaque in the arteries and even like potential blood pressure issues and things like that, blockages, especially if it tends to run in your family. Get this assessed and fix it along with obviously the other markers, because they're highly relevant. But omega-3 to 6 ratio is very, very important for predicting long-term cardiovascular health outcomes. Cool. Well, that's our list. We made it.
Yeah, there's all 10.
Yeah. Sorry, everyone. This is a longer than usual episode. We might do deep dives into some of these individual markers because there's a lot more that could be said. And if you are someone that would like to have some of this assessed, you don't have to be a coaching client for us to look at these for you. We do, obviously, all of our coaching clients that are regulars, we assess these things for them fairly often, and that's just part of the package. But if you want like a one-time assessment, we do offer that as well. If someone wants us to take a look at your blood work and make some suggestions of how to write some of the results and give you a plan. You can also purchase those services at highcallingfitness.com, along with learning anything else about us that's needed. And keep an eye out, because a couple videos are about to drop that we just recorded last week that we're very excited about, to explain a little bit more about what we do and what the next chapter looks like at High Calling Fitness. So keep an eye out. And thank you, Amanda, for joining. Thank you, Emily, for your contributions. And until next time, gains and grace.
Gains and
Gains and grace.